The first demonstration of photography took place in Paris in 1839 when Louis Daguerre showed a group of French artists and scientists the first daguerreotype. Yes, he named it after himself. This process produced an almost instantaneous detailed monochrome image of a silver-coated copper plate. Gosh, what does that mean? It actually means that there was a plate that was copper and it was coated with silver and it was exposed to light, and it gave an image of what it saw. It recorded an image. Now remember, instantaneous in this time in 1839 could have meant many minutes, unlike what it means to us. So early critics of photography complained that the camera didn't offer this control over the subject matter that painting does. But the camera at that time did offer the capacity to crop and select the final area of print that it wanted. The capacity to alter the aperture means opening, of the lens. The camera and the photographer now have the ability to transform a visual experience into art. And in this particular lecture, we are going to be talking about the principles of photography. In this lecture, I'm going to introduce you to the visual principles of photography. I am choosing not to talk about the types of camera, film, or digital because that'll reach into subjects that will take this lecture down a discussion path that will veer from this principles of photography. So when you look at a photo, these are the elements I would like for you to be aware of. The principles are light quality or tone, texture, focus, angle of view, which is the same of line, framing, composition, shape, and then color. These are how we're going to examine the principles of photography. Light quality describes the source, the amount, and the direction of lighting in a photograph. Light can come from natural sources like the sun. It can be altered or created by humans by such things as flash bulbs or lamps. It can be diffused by clouds or by a human being merely putting a veil of cloth over a lamp. Now, the direction of the light also is important when looking at photographs. It can come from above, behind, from the side, below. It can be bright or dim, cloudy or directional, diffused, meaning that it's going through some kind of cloth or cloud, and flash. These are some of the terms that people use to describe lighting, and I am putting that in your repertoire of words. Lighting is also an important creative element of composition. So by controlling the light and the direction of where you want it, you can subdue objects or you can distract people from a scene, and you can also give more emphasis to a main point of interest. So for this good picture composition, you have to develop an awareness of how changes in lighting can affect the appearance of things around you. Light and shadow can be used in composition to create a mood, to draw attention to an area, to modify or distort shape, and to bring out form and texture in the subject that you're photographing. So if you look at this particular photograph that I've put before you, where is the direction of light coming from? And the amount that's being used. What do you think the source is of this lighting? And what is it subduing in the background? So those are the things that you need to start looking at as you look at photography or photographs. Shadows are key to form in photographs, because without shadows, then the subject records this form without curvature or texture, and it appears flat and lifeless, the same way that we can see in painting when artists do not put shadow and reflection within their work. This doesn't mean that the shadows must be harsh and black to achieve that form of curvature and texture. They can be soft, yet they can have this sufficient density to show the most delicate roundness and form. And generally, harsh black shadows are undesirable in a photograph because of the loss of detail that might happen within them. When you look at this particular photograph that we're looking at, determine the source of light. What is it? Is it sun, lamp, flash? Which direction does it come from? Does it come from up above, below, from the side? And what kind of light do you think this is? Is it a strong light with harsh shadows, or is it diffused with soft and light shadows? When we think about it from a compositional standpoint, black shadows can be really useful in balancing a scene and directing attention to your point of interest. Harsh shadows can also be excellent for emphasizing texture and form, for creating these interesting patterns, and for directing attention to the main point of interest. However, the same elements of the harsh shadows can obscure your detail and reduce your form. So when the lighting is harsh, such as on a clear or a sunny day, shadows have these sharp, defined edges and are probably very dark, and sometimes to a point where they appear stronger than the subject itself that the artist might want to attract your attention to them. When you look at this particular photograph, this is a very famous photograph. Again, determine the light source. Do you even see any shadows? What direction is the light coming from? Is it from above or below, from the side? What kind of light do you think it is? All of those things you should always ask questions when looking at a photograph, even your own. You absolutely must have light to make a photograph, which is why lighting got top billing. It is absolutely the foundation of photography, but equally important is the subject. Now, a strong subject is more than a good-looking model. It's the setting, it's clothing, props, accessory, pose, it's the emotional expression, all work together to tell you a story. And it is up to the photographer to make sure that it is a story worth telling. So the majority of photographers, whether they are professional or amateur, will have a medium to work with. That's the same thing that visual artists have. Painters, sculptors, sketch artists, and any ones that you can name. A photographer needs a good eye for detail while choosing their subject. I put 5 very different photographs for you to look at as far as subjects are concerned to show you that you can have this variation down to a drop of water on the stem of a leaf. So you see the focus of the drop of water and how it's blurred out in the back, and we'll talk about focus in our next slide. The look of a child. What point would a photographer have in taking the picture of a cigarette? And then when we get to angle of view, go back to this slide and decide why that angle. And when you look at this fan, this yellow fan, interesting angle the photographer decided to use to take a picture of a mere yellow fan that we were just passed by. Oh, yellow fan. And lastly, flowers are very popular, but I like this one because the photographer decided that he wanted to frame it in a way where the daffodil's not in the center. So all of these are direct choices by the photographer. Focus is the sharpness or clarity of subjects in a photographic image. Soft focus is created when a photographer manipulates the camera to have blurry, gentle edges. So when you look at this particular photograph, this is a ball in a garden. This is an ornamental sculpture in a garden, and the photographer has chosen to focus on the main point of this ornament, while they've blurred out the back of the path, the plants, the trees, and also if you go back to the other slide with the drop, where you have the drop of water that's in focus and everything else blurred behind it. Photographers use the aperture, that's the lens opening, and the limitations of the lens to create the sharp detail with soft edges, or both. When they do that, that's called selective focus. Focus isn't just about what to focus on, all right? It's also about how much depth of field do you want to show in your photograph. How much do you want to blur out the background or the foreground elements? And how much of the subject do you really need in sharp focus? And with the right set of lenses, you can really have a lot of control over that aspect, and it makes this really significant difference in the resulting images. Now, the one that you're looking at, Mama's Roses, I took this photograph in March of 2008. And there are people in the background, but what I chose to do is to blur out the people in the background and focus strictly on those roses, because I thought that was what I wanted you to recognize as something that was very beautiful. Now, I could have focused on the people in the background and blurred out the roses, and that again controls your focus. Gordon Parks photographed this American Gothic, and if you notice, the flag is out of focus. The flag is out of focus, I can say that. And you see this custodian, she is in focus. What is he trying to say? What's in sharp focus? Has the photographer kept everything in sharp focus, or has the photographer kept only a few things in focus? Those are the questions you need to ask yourself. What's in soft focus? And if you know anything about Gordon Parks and why he took this photograph, this is during World War II, and there was still segregation in the United States, and he's trying to make an appointment that, he's trying to make a point. I got it. He's trying to make a point about everyone being under this American flag. Look up Gordon Parks. He's a fabulous photographer. He died, I guess, about 2 years ago, but he's worth examining if he might be somebody you might want to use in the future as a focus on a project. The next principle is framing. Framing is how a photographer carefully presents a subject, and unlike painters who usually begin with a blank canvas, photographers begin with everything in front of them, and then they have to decide how they want to use it. And once a subject is found, the photographer decides what to include in the picture frame. And then what a photographer does is they compose the image to draw the viewer's attention to the subject in a way that expresses their best idea of the photograph. Now, there are many things that go into this framing. What compositional elements do you want there? Because that composition is going to be defining the characteristics that separate a forgettable snapshot from a photo to one that's making a strong impact. What is the composition? Simply, composition is the arrangement of elements in a frame so that they form a harmonious whole. Composition, again, and framing. The simple definition is composition is the arrangement of elements in the frame so that they form a harmonious whole. And I really do think that people have a natural understanding of what good composition is. This is Jefferson's tomb, and if you look, the first time, I took both of these photographs in March of 2007, and if you look, the first one I took was of plants and trees, and you see Jefferson's tomb, but is that really being brought out to you? Did I really frame that well? And then I took a second one where I allowed the trees to frame out that. So it's a choice. And if I was going to put one of these out as an art piece, then I would probably choose the one that's on the lower part of your screen. The elements that make up a photograph are the subjects, the background, the shape, the color, the line. Everything in the frame is an element that can be arranged somehow. And we think, really, it can be arranged? The sky, the everything? Yes, everything. Because some elements can be physically moved, but because it depends on where you stand. Even the sky, even the earth, everything can be arranged depending on where you stand. The photographer can include as little or as much of those elements simply by the way they tilt the camera, by changing the angle. That is how they help frame the angle of what they want you to see, how they include and how they exclude things in a photograph. In this particular photograph, this is by Joel Meyerowitz. This is called, as you see, the Assemble Panoramic of the World Trade Center facing east. So he was on the east side. And what Joel Meyerowitz did is he took pictures right after 9/11. Then he took them in October, November, December, just to show the change of time. And he had photographs of the World Trade Center before it was destroyed. So in what way did the artist in this particular photograph use framing in this image? What in the photograph helps frame the center of interest for you? Exposure isn't just about getting a proper exposure to record the scene. That's the light. Especially in high contrast scenes. For example, you have choices. You can get a proper exposure for shadows or exposure for bright areas, but often not both. And that probably can be a good thing. You can choose to take a high key or a low key approach and expose to emphasize certain areas of an image over others. All right, in exposure, in photography, exposure is the total amount of light allowed to fall on the photographic medium. Okay, the medium being film or an image sensor in your digital camera. Exposure is a combination of the length of time and the level of illumination received by your photosensitive material. Again, your film or your image sensor. Exposure time is controlled by the camera's shutter speed. That's how much you're going to leave the lens aperture open. And slower shutter speeds and the greater lens aperture, that means emitting more light, produces this great exposure. So if you look at this that I gave you, I tried to show you what would happen when you open the aperture of your film, of your lens, and also the slower shutter speed, that is how long the lens stays open to allow light in, or fast. So at 1.3, look how much light it lets in. And then you go all the way up to 15 seconds that the lens is open. Look how it takes a dark, because this was taken at night, this night photograph, how it brightens it up. You can also do some of these changes while you're in the dark room or digitally, but this was done strictly by the camera before it was even exposed. When you can coordinate these principles and get them working in harmony, that's when the magic starts. It's the same way that music relies on harmony and rhythm, and visual art relies on light and focus, and theater relies on plot elements to tell a story. The composition, the exposure, the focus, the angle of view, all of this gives you these working harmonic elements and principles that allow you to create a photograph. Now, obviously, this photograph has been altered by Gregory Cruden, but look at some of the things he used. Look at the light, look at the angle, look at the framing. All of it is to focus your attention All of it is intentional. Next time you point a camera at someone or you choose your next subject, consider some of these ideas that we've covered and think about, are you taking a snapshot or creating a photographic, visual piece of art?